course, there's more information emerging as the days wear on after Wednesday's terrorism at the U.S. Capitol. And I don't know what else you'd call that other than the unlawful use of violence and intimidation, especially against civilians, to achieve political goals, because caches of pipe bombs and a cooler of Molotov cocktails were found. And that indicates to me that people were planning to do more than just break into the Capitol building and chase elected officials into hiding so they could take pictures in their offices. And I'm personally am hesitant to call Wednesday's action an attempted coup, though, because coups involve seizing control of the government and usually having much of the law enforcement or military apparatus involved in doing that. Now, while there is evidence that law enforcement being in the crowd of rioters and also enabling them has emerged in the video of the Capitol cop holding the hand of the one woman who stormed the Capitol building, gently helping her down the restricted stairs that she wasn't even supposed to be on, will never leave my memory. That evidence is being revealed. These folks did not have the full cooperation and involvement of the police or military. Now, I'm not at all saying that there is not a large contingent of sympathizers to these folks' cause and ideology in U.S. law enforcement and the military. We know that there is. I'm saying they didn't show up to help their brethren en masse to seize control of the legislature and install Trump as permanent whatever it is they want him to be. Having said that, I'm careful to acknowledge the experience of people who live in countries where the U.S. has carried out or influenced actual coups, where opposition groups have stormed the legislature and rounded up or outright killed elected officials to have them replaced with an entirely new government, all with police and military leading the way, or attempts to do that were made. Now, I'm not in the business of telling people what proper word to use to describe Wednesday's action, because while I do think it's important that we understand what happens in terms of organization, goals, and outcomes, and we're clear on that, I also don't want to make semantics a point of contention among comrades. And I'll say that the concern we need to have is not so much whether or not Wednesday's action was or was not a coup or an attempted coup, but who and what forces and organizations are behind the scenes that orchestrated all of this, because this wasn't organic. And what they're planning for January 20th isn't going to be organic either, because they are planning something else. And they've been planning something for 4 years. I said yesterday that Roger Stone actually created the Stop the Steal website in 2016. This was actually reported on CNN Business's website. And he did this ahead of the presidential election as a fundraising tool. Stone first brought the phrase up in the Republican primaries that year when he alleged that a cabal of Republicans was colluding to steal the nomination from Trump. Then, when Trump won the nomination, Stone revamped the messaging for the general election, alleging that if the election were close, Hillary Clinton and the Democrats were going to steal it from Trump. The Stop the Steal hashtag was also floated around in the 2018 midterms when Republicans used it in close races in the states. A bunch of Stop the Steal Facebook pages and groups were launched by a bunch of right-wing operatives, including people who worked with Steve Bannon. Facebook shut some of the pages down, citing the false information they were spreading, but page names were changed and copycat pages proliferated. And the next thing you know, the pages spreading the false information about a stolen election or fraud reached over 2.5 million followers. And this was going on at the same time that Steve Bannon was making appearances on Alex Jones talking about fraud in the election. So no, this whole movement is not at all organic or spontaneous. And it's really sad that the people who spent at least 4 years swearing that Black Lives Matter protests were staged and funded by George Soros or whomever, and were full of crisis actors who were paid by some shady operation, that they've been manipulated by Roger Stone, Steve Bannon, and their racist right-wing minions this whole time. But there are so many other thoughts I have about this. And one of them is that people are calling these rioters and potential terrorists traitors. And I can't help but wonder, what are they supposed to be traitors to? If we're saying that the racist violence that we've seen exposed over the summer, that culminated in Wednesday's actions, that again are not the end, is what America is and always has been, then aren't these people just being true to the game? So who and what are they betraying? Us, Black folks? You? No, they're not even betraying America. What they're betraying is the myth of America. They're actually telling you the truth about this country, and people just have a hard time accepting that. I understand that, but I wouldn't call these people traitors. They're reflecting what we've always known this country to be. And of course, the politicians want to impeach Trump and toss him out of office before January 20th, which I'm not at all opposed to, since the man does have the nuclear codes and he has been itching to start something with Iran or China or someone to end his presidency with a bang. But I'm not going to lay the so-called infiltration of law enforcement and the radicalization of at least half of white America on Trump. Because again, have you seen the history of this country? Trump wasn't president when the South Carolina State Police murdered 3 students at South Carolina State College in 1968, Black students, when the FBI and the Chicago Police Department colluded and murdered Fred Hampton and Mark Clark in 1969. He wasn't president when the National Guard murdered 4 white students at Kent State University, or when the Mississippi State Police murdered 2 Black students at Jackson State College a few days later in 1970. He wasn't president when the local and state police colluded with the Ku Klux Klan to murder labor organizers in Greensboro, North Carolina in 1979. Trump was not president when various police agencies assaulted unarmed and peaceful indigenous people at Standing Rock over a sustained period of time, day after day, night after night. I know people want to believe that law enforcement has been infiltrated by white supremacists recently, but the truth is that law enforcement in this country has always been a part of the expression of white supremacist ideology, willingly being the enforcement arm of the state that exists to keep the oppressed in our place. So law enforcement and even the military hasn't been infiltrated by white supremacists and racists. No, those institutions are white supremacists in this country. What are we going to do about that when Trump is gone, though? Because none of this is going to go away. Trump didn't bring it. He didn't create it. He was the central national figurehead these factions needed to coalesce and organize around the way that they have. But the burning question I think we need to be asking ourselves is, once he leaves office, what are we going to organize around once we don't have Trump to blame all our problems on? And when are we going to start working on that, folks? Because too many of us are already very, very late. Follow Luke Mon Nation on patreon.com/LukeMon Nation for lots of great content.